Okay, hey guys. We are going live with the week 3 live session for Shading and Lighting 2. So a couple different things we're going to be talking about today. I'm sure we'll have some people kind of filtering in and out through the course of this little lecture here. But if you guys do pop in, excuse me, feel free to say hi. Let me know you're live and you exist. And of course, you can use the little YouTube chat if you need to ask any questions as we're going through some stuff. Looks like the connection's pretty good. Maybe about a 10-second delay on my end from what you guys see, but not too bad. We've had worse. So, what's week 3 all about? So, week 3, as most of you who are probably watching this know, is all about transmissions and emissions. So, the main idea here is since you guys have pretty much been working with diffuse properties like diffuse reflections, specular reflections, it's all reflection based, so light bouncing off a surface. This week we're getting into transmissions. So transmissions is going to be when light passes through something. So probably the easiest thing for most people to identify would just be like your clear glass, water. Those are all transmissive effects. You do get a lot of really interesting effects from transmissions because you'll get caustics in here as well. But we're gonna probably do some of this stuff here in Maya in just a second. And I'm hoping we might have some time to show you a couple other fun things here with 3.3, talking about emissions. So 3.3, I probably won't spend a whole lot of time with the emission. Sorry, not the emission, the subsurface side of it. I did quite a few videos that already go into pretty good detail with this, so I'll just have you guys watch that. But I do want to show you a couple fun things with ways we can create other light sources, like using a glow attribute on a material, turning something to a mesh light, some other ways we can sort of recreate that effect right there. So let's jump in here. Oh, yeah, there we go. We're back. Let's try to jump in here and do this. So we're going to open up Maya, set the project. I already got this on my desktop, so we're just going to set it to that. Now this is the original version of the scene, so I have none of the fun stuff that you guys have at this point, where you've already got a lot of probably about 75% of the scene has already been textured. It's just a few random things kind of hanging out. I do want to show you something actually though before we get out of here. I was going through some of my older files when I was setting up the examples, and there was a couple things in there that I did want to show you before we're out of this thing. So I'll try to remember to do that, but let's just check out what we're starting with here. So I'm willing to bet this is probably gray. It's gray. Amazing, just like we thought. So nothing has been done. We're going to pretend like all this stuff has beautiful color and wood textures and an amazing wall texture and normal maps, all the things we've done. We're going to imagine it's there, but we're going to focus on some of these other little pieces here first. So one thing I would really recommend we do is anytime we are trying to create something like glass, or you're trying to get very close to something, like you're trying to see the detail here. I mean, obviously when you build a shot, the final camera is important, but occasionally you might have like a moving camera, or there's multiple angles that are seeing the piece of geometry. So it's pretty common for you to also make additional cameras that help you see certain things. So one thing I would recommend we do here, since we're going to be focusing on a lot of these little glass pieces to get this working, we probably want to make another camera that's just a little closer to this information. So what I'm going to do is just make a new camera. So we've done this plenty of times before in the first shading and lighting class, but just create cameras. Camera. Actually, you know what? Because we've been using the single point camera quite a bit, and I'm feeling kind of rebellious. Why don't we do a 2-point camera? We're going to get crazy here. So 2-point camera is a camera and an aim, and so a couple of you have probably seen this before, or maybe used it, because I did have a video on it in my dive deeper in the first class. But let's try making this thing just to see what that looks like. So the main difference here, if you kind of compare a single point camera and a 2-point. So single point camera is literally what you're seeing right here. You can look through it. You can, I can go to perspective here because this is a single point camera. You can use your alt left, middle, right mouse buttons to move around. I mean, it's probably the most basic type of camera you can think of. The 2-point's interesting though. So a 2-point, which is camera and aim, as soon as you make it, even if you just look at the way it's appearing in the outliner, you'll notice it is quite a bit different. It doesn't have the same icon, right? That looks different. You have the little plus symbol next to it. So what's that about? Well, you probably know that the previous times you've seen plus, it usually means there's a group, right? Because we've been using groups a lot. I actually have an issue apparently with the organization where I use groups on everything. But we have a group set up, and the camera group has the camera in it. So there's the icon we're used to seeing. And I've got this little aim right here. So I'm just going to click on, let's just click on the whole group and hit W. And you can see all this stuff is back here. So we're just going to move that out, move it up here. And what I'm going to do is set up a split. Okay, we're going to look through the camera. Let me actually name this. Let's call this Zoom Cam. What was my naming? Yeah, Zoom Cam. What is this error we keep getting? It's probably, oh, an error where the script editor won't load. There we go. Solid angle, that's something with Arnold. We don't care about Arnold. Okay. Arnold is a renderer, kind of like render band, so I must have it disabled or something's freaking out. But you can see the camera here, and if you click on the group, it's sort of selecting these two different things together. So the camera, if you move it around, you can sort of see how it almost looks like it's sort of hinged to this little aim thing, right? So I can move it back and forth. What we're going to do is try to move this over. Actually, let me go to my transform. And currently, I've shown this to a couple of you guys before, but when you move things around, like this one right here, that's not a good example, actually. Okay, this is a good one right here. For the vase, if you move it, it's based currently in object space, but if I rotate it, oops, let's just do rotate Y here. See how when I'm turning it by about like 45 degrees, if I do W again, it understands that it's now doing the translation based off of that new rotation angle. So that's a local coordinate system adjustment. And that's what we're currently seeing with the camera, where I'm moving it and it's kind of having an issue where it's like attached to this little aim point. What I'm going to do is just change the move to a world space coordinate just temporarily. So we're going to double click on the move tool, go here to world, and what this is going to do is now when I move, you can see I can just freely move the camera around. It's not, when it rotates, it doesn't try to readjust the manipulator. I'm just going to do this, and we're going to go to, hold space, go to my top view. Let's just zoom up here, and I'm going to move this maybe kind of close to where the other one is. I can kind of see from above where that guy's currently positioned. And we're going to click on the aim. And we're looking through the camera, by the way, in this other viewport. So when I move the aim around from the top camera, see what's happening? So this is controlling what the camera is looking at. And you can do this in perspective. So if I go to perspective and move it around, it looks like I'm moving the camera or rotating it. You can actually see it right there. Let me try to get, there you go. Now you can see it. There you go. So see, it's trying to follow this little point right here. This is a 2-point. So why would we want to do that? Well, not that it's necessary, but for this, it's kind of cool because I could, if I wanted to, put the aim, let's actually go to the top, right on top of that bottle right there, and then bring it down. So I can force the camera to aim at it. And because this is its own unique node, there are ways to constrain it to the bottle's location using aim constraints or parent constraints, or grouping, which is basically a parent constraint. So constraints means I could potentially get this aim to follow the location of the bottle. And so if we move the bottle, it will cause the camera actually to aim and adjust its rotation based on the bottle's movement. So you can almost do like a tracking shot with that. It's pretty interesting stuff, but we're just using it just so now if I move the camera around, I'm always looking at the bottle. Kind of neat. So we'll just push that in a little bit. Let's just take the aim. I need to close this down so I can see what the whole frame's looking like. That actually, it's not too bad. Yeah, I might just move this over and take the aim. If I can click on it. Hello, aim. Nope. Okay, we're going to the outliner. And we'll just slide that over. There we go. That should be good. So this is going to be our shot. Walk closer to the bottles using our nifty little 2-point camera. Now what we're going to do is try to get some basic glass created here, and we're going to see it up close. So currently in the render, it's just all going to be gray. So how do we build glass? Well, let's take the easy way out first. I'm going to do one of these bottles with a material preset. So here's our little render band preset browser. Everybody loves this thing. It's like the easy button. You just go in here, find a cool material, and apply it. Not a whole lot of thinking. Let's put that on this. And if I come down here to, where are we at? To glass. That makes sense. It's alphabetical. But come to the glass. We do have a couple of different ones we can use, which is kind of terrifying that the icons don't get much bigger than this. But here we have a blue glass, clear, frosted, industrial, thin glass. This one's kind of similar to the soap bubble, and I'm kind of surprised we're not seeing soap bubble here. Where did soap bubble go? Where? Oh, there. Oh, it's under liquids. That makes sense. These are also kind of similar to the glass, where they have that transmissive effect. So both of these are pretty similar if you start comparing attributes. Now I'm going to use maybe. Let's try doing industrial actually for this one. I haven't done this one very often. So we're going to click, right click on the little material preset and do import and assign to selected. Okay, so it's on there. Now, one of the big things, when you assign materials like this is always trying to figure out, well, how do I know if it really, yeah. Oh, hey, David. By the way, David, I'm very pleased that you've been in so many of my live sessions. This has been a real treat. Yeah, so my monitor's resolution is set to 4K, and that clearly is not any of the reasons why the icons look like, little micro machines. So it's a 4K display, which is great for when I'm watching movies, but in hindsight, has been causing quite a few issues with random softwares. But that's okay. Tiny icons. So we have that on there, and I'm just going to hit render real quick. Let's just turn that on. We'll turn off selection highlighting just so I'm not seeing that. And currently we have this little glass guy right here. I just turned selection highlighting off, so when I click on the glass, it doesn't actually show up in the render. But you can tell, like right off the bat, this actually looks pretty decent. Not the most exciting glass bottle. We don't have the liquid in it, which would be sort of a nested dielectric effect where you have like two surfaces with different index refractions butting up against each other. There's a bunch of crazy math. I used to teach this in a different class. We would get really deep into the math and talking about how the speed of light changes speed as it goes through different mediums. But seeing how we're only in the second class of the program, we're not going to make people's brains explode quite yet. But we could put liquid in here, and there's some ways within render band to sort of control how the light refracts through to get the right physically, or at least visually, the physically correct look. So if we go to the material, though, I do want to show you what this looks like. So the big thing here, when you look at a glass preset, just at the top, remember how every time we make a Pixar surface material from scratch, the first thing you guys always remember is that all these Pixar surface materials are gray, right? This is my default one that's on everything. It's a default Pixar surface. I just named it that, but I haven't changed anything. It's gain of 1. We have this sort of 0.18 value right here, which is basically visually 50% gray due to our sRGB color space. But we'll call it 50% gray. Not super exciting. But as soon as you get to this guy, you'll notice that, wait a minute, the diffuse is gone. So that's a little weird, but we'll pretend like that's normal. We're going to come down here to glass and try to find out what exactly this preset is doing. All right, so let's jump in here. This is what the glass, or at least the industrial glass preset looks like. And if you start, really what you guys can even do, honestly, is just bring in a couple presets from there and just kind of compare visually what they look like. They're all a little different. They have different gain settings, different roughness values. A couple of these guys get into changing the refractive index. I think some of them in the liquid section also get into these interior settings where, actually this has an extinction. I didn't even realize that because I haven't looked at this one before. On the different extinction colors and albedo colors, which sort of change kind of how the light is absorbed kind of internally in the glass. It kind of gives you the effect of, it's not really like stained glass, but it kind of changes how the light colors decay internally. I've had a lot of luck using these for like liquids, but overall very simple. Now what I'm going to do is on this, try to recreate this one from scratch myself. So we're not going to use a preset on this and see like how different we can get these. So we're going to click. And actually, did I see a second bottle? No, that's weird. I could have swore for a second I saw a second bottle showing up on top of itself. We're going to go here, and this time we're going to make a Pixar surface from scratch. Okay, so it's on there. It's called Pixar Surface 2. Let's just rename this real quick because that's a terrible naming convention. We're going to call this Hackett glass because we have Mr. Hackett here with us. So we've got our Hackett glass. Now currently I haven't changed anything yet. And let's pretend that we didn't really look at this diffuse section. We just jumped immediately down to glass because we're like, okay, down here, even just comparing materials, we can see what's going on here. I could literally just copy values between the two. To get a similar look. So let's just see what happens here. I'm going to do that. So 0.95, 0.95. This is pure white and just about as low as a roughness as you can get, that it still uses BXDF samples. So let's try this out. We're going to do 0.95, 0.95. I'll even do the same roughness, extremely tiny. Now I've done it. So it's on there, but you can tell there's something just a little off about it. Now, the thing with what we're doing right now is even though we have created what appears to be the same glass properties, you'll notice this has a very strange milky color. And it's probably one of the most common issues with new artists in Maya or using RenderBand is they'll immediately jump to glass and they sort of forget or maybe they don't really know how this material combines these different things together. So the way this material works, all these sections are called lobes, but all these different lobes are essentially just added together. So it's taking this result, it's adding it with this one up here. It'll add specular properties from primary spec. It'll add whatever's in rough specular. It'll add clear coat, and that's really why a lot of these sections by default are black, because black, as we know, or black is the number 0. So anytime you add 0 to something else, it doesn't do anything, right? So like if you had the number 8 and you said, I'm going to add 0 to it, it's still 8. So these are all off when they're set to black. This though, because remember our material always starts with that little value there in gray for diffuse reflection, it is still adding a gray color into the glass. And so we're getting a mix of a glass, like a refractive surface property or transmissions. It does reflect as well, but it's also adding the diffuse reflection. So we're getting a very odd looking result. Like it's not quite glass and it's not quite opaque gray either. So what we want to do is just make sure that diffuse is dead. We're going to kill it. So you either can just drag the gain all the way to 0. You can take the color to black. Either of these will do the trick. You can slam them both down all the way if you really hate diffuse. It doesn't matter. Either of those will kill the diffuse reflection completely. So we're good. Now we basically have the same result. And I know this probably seems a little bit weird because we might be wondering, why did we spend 5 minutes doing this when literally that's a preset? It's because I want you to really understand that you don't have to rely on presets all the time. And when you get faster at this, you might find it actually easier in some cases to literally just use the shortcut up here for the Pixar surface and just quickly slam your values around to get it very, very close as a starting point. So I do that quite a bit now. A lot of the presets are good, but I tend to use the presets more as a not necessarily like a starting point, but I use them to sort of critique how a material might look, and I kind of compare presets to something I'm doing to maybe like get a better idea of like, okay, this is using a clear coat, and maybe I should maybe incorporate a clear coat in mine, or the whiskey one is a really cool color tinting effect. What is it in the shader that's doing that color? And I'll sort of like pull bits and pieces from presets and just sort of use that on my own Pixar surfaces. So really good to kind of analyze those. Now, a bunch of things we could do here with the glass. If we come down into advanced, we have this whole refractive index thing. And it's not really hidden, but it's kind of in this little subsection here of glass. And so a lot of people don't really notice this, but the refractive index is incredibly important. And I do want to show you an interesting little effect here. I'm going to put the gain for both of these to 1. And all that is, by the way, these are multipliers on how the glass's refractions and reflections work. So if they were still off, we actually would get black because I've also killed diffuse, so there's literally nothing on the material now. But if you make it 100% refractive, you can see we're looking through it, but it doesn't really look like glass because glass isn't just the transmission. There's also light bouncing off the surface, right? Like this guy. So light reacts 2 different ways. We also want it to reflect. And I'm cranking both of these up to 100%. So no loss of energy. And this is still set to white. Actually, I do want to put this to 0 in this case, just to kind of show you something. Let's do a crop over that. So if you have the refractive index set to 1.5, what this is basically alluding to is if the speed, actually, you know what? Let me bring this up real quick. I said I wasn't going to do it, but we're going to do it, darn it. Here we go. So we're currently looking at the speed of light. So speed of light is just shy of 300 million meters per second. It's hard to even wrap your mind around how stupidly fast that is. 300 million meters per second. So light is hauling. And this is the speed of light in a vacuum. And you may think that this is not important. It's kind of fun to know about this stuff, but this is actually kind of important based on what's going on here with the shader. So because this is the speed of light in a vacuum, what this guy right here is telling you is that as soon as the light hits a surface that has a density, like there's atoms and molecules there, the light isn't just going to pass through it like it doesn't exist. It's still going to go through it because it's transmissive, but because there is a thickness to it and there is something there, the light speed is actually going to slow down. This number is telling you as a measurement, sort of like a fraction of how much the light is changing. So when it's set to 1.5, it means the speed of light was 1.5 times faster in the vacuum of space with nothing than it was going through the bottle. If you look up the index of refraction for diamond, it'll say it's supposed to be 2.42. Now watch that bottle when I go to about 2.42. You can see that it's a little bit of a color there. It's probably picking up a little bit of a reflection from behind the camera. So you can see we're getting grass and other things in here for some reason. Let me go back to this again. It's a little weird, right? So we're getting, for some reason, more of this, but also look at the highlights and the specular reflections all over the surface when I go back to diamond. You'll notice they're probably shifting a little, but did you kind of notice how much brighter some of those got? The intensity went up. And that, again, is all coming from this guy. So it's kind of a reason why diamonds are so popular for like engagement and wedding rings. There's also the notorious blood diamonds. It's a whole other discussion, which is very depressing. But you're basically seeing that because the diamond is extremely dense with the way the carbon is ranged, that you get very, very strong energy in the specular reflection, and the light tends to distort a lot more as it refracts. And I have a feeling, I'm not sure if it's the reflection or the refraction, but one of those is for sure causing this background to become much more visible than it did before. So if I go back to glass, let's do that one more time. What would happen if I put this to 1? So 1, which is basically air, or not technically air, but it's pretty damn close. We're going to do 1, and look what happened in the bottle. Poof. Yep. Oh, yeah. So good point. So if you guys are watching what David's typing there in the chat, he's totally right. The cut of the diamond, the way these are set up, a lot of them are set up to actually cause and make sure that the light coming through it always sort of refracts and ends up bending through the top part of the diamond's cut. So you kind of get that brilliant shimmer right on the surface where most people are going to see it. It's actually pretty crazy, like how much time is probably spent developing all these different types of cuts just to make sure that light refracts a very specific way through it to get you to like the most brilliant type of shimmer. Oh, and no dispersion. Kind of curious though, David, since you're in here talking too, do you guys have plans to add dispersion? Let me test. I think you guys might be hearing me again. You guys hear me? I'm back. Wonderful. I don't know when it cut off. This has been a wonderful new issue with my laptop and OBS. But yeah, dispersion basically is something I hopefully we get pretty soon. Right. So what he's saying is because since we have light has a certain speed it's traveling, and each frequency of light is what's kind of producing the visible light spectrum. They're all of kind of different. The different frequencies mean when it refracts and bends through the surface, they start to spread apart a little bit. It's that sort of prismatic effect that we see a lot. But yeah, if I know MPC is probably begging for it, but if that's not enough reason for you guys to invest all your time to get that in a render band, clearly me, your favorite instructor at the LA Film School, will be the one deciding factor they need to make sure that's a priority. Yeah, that would be amazing. Call it the Jared Slider. I would love that. So Alex, you had a question about the second refractive index. Let me see what you're talking about. Are you referring to this, the manifold walk? Or do you mean, yeah, there's also up here, actually, I thought there was one there at one point. Maybe not. Maybe it's only on physical. Oh, it's probably under physical. Wait a second. Yeah, there's also one here. This is a whole other discussion. How to use physical. This is a lot of the presets, like the metal ones, you'll see use this. But it's like sort of a different way to calculate the specular reflection using the refractive index. Birefractive. I'll have to look into that, actually. Let me actually make a note of that. So you said you looked up refractive indexes. Birefractive. Oh, if I not Oh, so I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. So it's probably something a very particular type of molecule or coating where it might be splitting light between two layers. I'll have to look into it though. It makes me think that this is like a almost like an oil and water effect because it has a similar look, but it must be something where it's splitting twice and getting a much more exaggerated split. Yeah, that's cool though. Good find on that. Yeah, so really what we're doing here today, Alex, is we're giving David a checklist of things he's going to have to prioritize with RenderMan. These are all the fun things that we need in the software. Um, but kind of back to what we were talking about. Um, what were we even talking about? So the thing here with the refractive index is I thought it was kind of interesting when this really clicked for me years ago with a different renderer called Mental Ray. I remember like reading up about the speed of light, and I put it to 1, which means the speed of light doesn't change when it goes through the surface. And if this material has no loss of energy through gain as a refraction or a reflection, and there's no roughness and the color is white, which is basically means just as close to perfect as you can get. You would never know visually it's even there because the light has nothing that's telling it needs to change. It doesn't bend, it doesn't bounce off it. Well, actually, it does bounce off it, but it's not. You don't see it. It's not tinted through the color. There's no roughness breaking it up. So visually, you would never know this thing is there because it's about as close to air as possible. Um, but it's interesting because even if you leave the refractive index of 1, it doesn't look like it's there. If you do little things like this, like bring the roughness up, you'll notice something does happen. Let me just crank that up a little more. Yeah, you can kind of see this like weird ghosting effect where it's trying to blur. It's still not going to do it, mostly due to this refractive index. If I give it a tint, we'll probably see a little bit more. There we go. So it's actually tinting what's behind it. It renders really quick, by the way, because we have no refractive index where it's set to 1. It's uh, much easier to calculate. And I've used this before to do. I want to say maybe the thin walled or that soap bubble one might have something kind of similar to this. It probably has like iridescence built into it too. But a lot of the thinner glasses, if it's so thin where as far as the thickness of the material, where you don't want it to bend what's behind it, a lot of times you can set it to 1 like this, or put it to thin, and you're going to get a much faster calculation, but it still visually kind of looks like glass, but not enough where you're adding a lot of render time. Because again, this does add uh, quite an expensive render to it when you start cranking that thing up. But let's go back to glass. Got derailed there with some talks of index refractions. So we have our little tint on it. You can see it's very easy. One thing I would say to be careful about whenever you're going through here and trying to tint anything is to be very hesitant with the color you pick. So for example, like if you wanted to do like the Heineken beer bottle, double refraction or by refringence. Okay, I'm gonna definitely look that up later. I really get like super deep into all this stuff like this, so this is probably something I have not looked into yet. So thank you for that, Alex. Um, But if you actually pretend you're doing something like the Heineken beer bottle, you might look at a reference image and just be like, all right, so it's green, it's a lot richer, it's darker. Like there's our Heineken beer bottle, we've nailed it, and good Lord, what the hell has happened? So you can see that even though we're picking a specific color over here, looking at reference, with having that in mind, man, that is far off from that. Now, is it wrong? Technically, no, for what we've done, but it's really important to understand why it's doing this. So the reason why we're getting this very different look is because you're seeing this is sort of acting like a multiplier where it's multiplying as the light passes through. So the light is actually hitting um, the camera. There's some samples coming over here and collecting it, but basically light is coming to our eye each time it passes through a face. And if I go to 4, which is wireframe, this is a thickness to it, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4 faces. It's basically getting multiplied through each face. And actually, David, maybe since you're here, you could. I meant to ask you about this before, but the way this one's calculated with the Pixar surface, is this similar to? I guess the way Mental Ray would do it, where it's a per face multiplication, or is this one actually using the distance, like a physical depth? Because I think before with Mental Ray, it was definitely like a per face multiplier, but it wouldn't really understand it if it was it is distance. Okay, that's interesting. I'll have to play around that a little bit more. So based on, oh, it should have been distance, but it's not actually distance, right? It's actually set to a, yeah. So basically, what we're kind of getting at here, did I just duplicate the bottle? Nope. Um, is regardless if it's like a distance thing or if it's like just counting the number of faces, it's cutting through something that has volume to it, and you're seeing this effect get stacked on itself multiple times, which is resulting in this really dark look. It still looks cool, but it's not what we wanted. So what I just tend to do is I always ease back on my saturation and value to prevent that from happening. So if you start boosting value up, you'll see we start to get more information. And actually, it's not too far off from the Heineken bottle now. We'll go up a little bit. Maybe just pull the saturation back slightly, and perhaps we're there. And even with a beer bottle, if I just start drifting towards like orange, maybe a little more yellow than that actually, but something like this, we're probably not too far off from it. I think this might be actually a little light because a lot of the brown beer bottles are still fairly dark, but we're hovering around there. You can tell this looks more like a pastel color, but like visually what we're seeing might be accurate. So that'll take a little experimenting, but you'll get it figured out. Other thing too, some things we can do with roughness. So currently I have 0 roughness. On a lot of the presets, even when it's like a clear glass, they have it set to 0.001. You can probably correct me if I'm wrong on this, David, as well, but I believe the reason they're doing the 0.001 is just to sort of trick the renderer into using BXDF samples, I would think. And plus, you wouldn't want to have absolutely perfect glass. I think it's basically to trick this thing to thinking it needs multiple local samples. Right. Yeah, and it's not true to life because nothing is that perfect. Well, you are, David. You're absolutely perfect. but not the glass. So we can do like 0.1, and that'll blur that just a little bit. So even this is still fairly subtle here. But that's going to blur the reflections and the refractions. So bounced light off the surface and light passing through it, both get a little bit of a blur. And if you end up cranking the hell out of this thing like 0.5, you'll actually notice we get a frosted glass, which is also really, really cool looking. It looks a lot brighter, mainly because a lot of the reflections that we were getting before, these highlights, are sort of being dispersed and broken up across the surface, and so we're allowing light rays that weren't previously being captured to kind of ricochet around and give us a different look. So I do like that effect as well. So let's add a roughness map in here real quick. And I don't remember if I've talked to you about this. I'm not sure if it's who's in here with me, by the way. I know it's obviously myself. We got David, Alex. There might be 1 or 2 other people in here. I don't know. But Alex, did I ever talk to you or show you a roughness map yet? Have you seen a roughness texture before? I don't have it in any of the videos, I don't think. But sometimes I'll do this in a live session. I've lost track if I even did it in one of the live sessions before. Did a few months ago. If a roughness texture or roughness map does not sound familiar, I could do that real quick so I can show you what it looks like. Here's a roughness texture. These would all work pretty well. White metal roughness. These actually would work even pretty well on the bottle. Oh, I don't blame you. I know. It's like we maybe went over it. You know, that I'm asking you about that one thing that we learned in a sea of millions of other things we've talked about. So roughness maps are, I think for me, one of my absolute favorite textures. And I realized I'm sounding extremely dorky right now, getting excited about a texture map. But usually when people think of textures, we think of like the color. because that's kind of the typical one that people identify really quickly. You guys have been doing color maps all month. Um, finding a wood texture online, going, doing a search. You got like a sticker. Actually, Alex, you have used a ton of color maps because you basically went through the gambit with that vehicle, and you were doing like Yoshi things on the hood, and you were doing your Undertaker car and Rowdy Roddy Piper. Um, so you've done a lot of color maps. But this, to me, is equally as important. And I really love seeing projects where the artist or artist really understand how to use a roughness map effectively. Because what the roughness map does, and it might not look like much, it's just a weird grayscale looking texture, typically a single channel. I want to see if I can, not Mapo, jeez. I want you to see what it looks like on a surface. Yeah, I think that one always pops up. Yeah, we'll just use it. It'll kind of break up the highlight where it tells the material that some areas are shinier than others. Super, super important. So let's try to actually use one of these real quick to get something working. I'm going to do roughness, texture, glass, and I bet we can find something that looks like fingerprint. Actually, got the scratch map's not too bad. And these are pretty low resolution, but these will probably still work. I guess I could go into Painter. Really didn't want to do that yet. Yeah, we found a couple back here that we could probably use. These will all work, I guess. We'll just use this one. I don't see a watermark that seems legit. Okay, so I've got a texture. Please take me to the texture. It did. Incredible. We're going to download this the legit way. Oh, I can download it without having to do some weird run around. Amazing. So let's do that. All right, 1 second here. We're going to move this into our project real quick. Okay. So ideally, like, because we're doing a texture, I should have like subfolders in here set up for like the bottle, but we're just going to drop that in there. So it's in source images. And let's go back here. And what I'm going to do, we'll do this as a Hypershade, which I'm getting more tired of using by the day, it seems like. I think the last time we were in one of these live sessions too, David, you were saying, or maybe I was talking to you one-on-one, you're saying a lot of people are just sort of transitioning into the node editor as their primary one now, correct? So if that's the case, I might be shifting over here. Really similar to the Hypershade. This is a little clunky at times, but node editor is fairly similar to it. Actually has, oh good, we're not going to open up today. Really? Oh, there we go. This one's kind of neat too because this will display other types of nodes that don't currently appear in the Hypershade, like geometry groups. I think almost anything will appear in here, but it's fairly similar to the graph at the bottom. But if we graph out our Hackett glass, and we're going to make the texture on the side is connect it. So let's do tab, file, texture. So we're making a Maya file node, very similar to what I've done in the videos where I kind of do the right click create, and then we're just doing a Maya 2D texture file. RenderMan does have its own file node or texture node. We're just using the Maya version, but they both are fine. So we'll go to the folder, and okay, we're in source images. That's alarming. What? Hold on a second. Well, that's odd. Weird. Okay, we're not seeing it for some reason. I wonder if this is actually not a PNG. This might be a weird file type. Let me try to save this again. Okay, as a PNG again. That's legit. Roughness map, please work, which will clearly be what we need to get this to show up. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Oh my god. Okay, don't mind me. I'm in the completely wrong directory. I think I just made another version on here. I put it. Yep. Okay, that's why it didn't show up. I got about 4 versions of this project in different areas, and I was looking in the wrong folder. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I thought it like I had a weird extension where sometimes it'll say it's a .png or a .jpeg, but then like it's not actually a PNG and it can't figure out what it is. This was just me being an idiot and putting it in another version of the project in my documents folder. Crisis averted. So we're going to have this here, and I'm going to connect it to the glass roughness. Now, we could definitely middle mouse drag it. It'll connect, but I do think it's important to also understand how these little node connections work here. So you can see we have a glass roughness visible here, and I've talked about this a little bit in some of the videos, but when you click on the material or any node, if you use your 1, 2, 3, 4 hotkeys, 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll sort of collapse and expand different visible things depending on what you need. Glass is thankfully one of the ones that does pop up by default. Now the thing here is when you connect in a texture, you always want to think about what are your outputs and inputs. Like some of these guys have like color inputs, which are red. They also have like a plus symbol next to it, which is a good indication. There's 3 channels there. I don't know if there are any 2-channel attributes on here. 2 channels are typically something with like S and T, U and V, typically like a 2D texture coordinate system would have that, but this roughness is a single channel. It's a scalar value, so usually 0 to 1. But color won't connect, right? So it needs an alpha. So we're going to drag alpha over to glass roughness. Now the key with this is anytime I do an alpha connection like this, you want to think about what are the channels actually in the texture file. So I have a PNG and it looks like it's grayscale, but this is still a color map. It's still RGB. It's just RGB is all the same value, so it looks grayscale. So in order for this to work, since this is expecting an alpha output, and this most likely doesn't have an alpha channel built into it, this will probably not do anything. But under color balance is a really important checkbox. I actually at one point, I used to joke around with my old buddy Sean Reinhardt about this, that he's another texture artist, but he always used to joke around that I was going to get this tattooed on me at some point because this used to be one of the most common things I would have to remind students about when they were making texture connections is turning this stupid little checkbox on. So what this does is it makes sure that if you have a color file that's using an alpha output and you want the alpha channel to pull from the color, you turn this on. So this is basically sort of behind the scenes, taking the 3 color channels, converting it to a grayscale alpha, and so it's still making its way out of here through the alpha channel. But yeah, this used to, you're right, this used to be on by default, David. It's been off. It's very sad. I hate the extra clicking I have to do now. How dare they make me burn an extra 2 calories every click. But if we have that turned on, I'm also going to change this to raw color space. This is a whole other discussion we're not going to have time to get into. But let's see if we see it. Oh, actually, I didn't even look at the UVs. Oh, this thing better be UV'd. Please be UV'd. It is. Oh, though that is a very efficient UV map. Oh, because I have both together. That makes sense. Yeah, it's UV'd. So this should show up. It's a little hard to see it. What I'm going to do is drop in a remap value in here. Actually, let me do the Pixar. I want to look at the Pixar remap real quick. No, we're not feeling that. We'll use the old Maya way. So this is a way to control contrast, this little remap value. I just did tab and typed in remap value. I'm basically going to take this thing, put it into the input value. We're going to play around with the contrast and then spit out the result back under roughness. It's kind of similar to like if you had done a levels in Photoshop. That's basically what this is inside of Maya. We'll just do alpha to input value. Out value goes to roughness. So we're using value. Okay, we should be able to see this. Let me actually get in a lot closer to see this. Draw over this. And I might need to boost this up a lot. Let's see if I make it rougher. We should be seeing some patches on here where it looks, yeah, I think it's working. I'm going to make it really high contrast. It's not the easiest to see because I can't really visually see the texture very well, but I think if I let it render long enough, we'd see it. I might have to like actually lighten this thing up too because it's very dark. Let's turn that off for a second. Yeah, it's starting to show up a little bit more as I pull that color out of it. But I don't know if you can probably see where it looks like there's drier patches on there. That's actually that texture that's doing that. It's actually really simple too, because I don't even know what the hell that texture was from. I just did a search for a roughness map. It looked like some random dirt stain or from metal or something. But by putting it on there, actually now that it's kind of rendered long enough, it's looking pretty good. You actually can see the dry patches all over this thing, where it's a little bit lighter. That's the higher roughness, and the darker sections are where it's a lower roughness. And it's actually pretty amazing sometimes how just by getting a roughness map connected in here, it does take a bit to tweak the contrast and sort of visually get it to do what you want. But man, what a difference it makes, because you compare this to the one next to it. And I mean, I know the color is a little bit different, but this already feels so much more interesting and believable just with that one little dirt texture compared to this guy. And actually, Alex, since I know you've been kind of ahead through most of these activities, that might be a fun challenge for you to try finding like some random dirt map. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be grayscale. You can still use color maps and still connect it, and it'll kind of work on the back end of Maya with as long as alphas luminance is turned on. You could take a picture of your fingerprint on your laptop and convert that to a roughness map. It might be kind of fun for you to try getting one of those connected just to see if you can get the glasses transmissions to break up a little bit. But I really like that. We're going to be doing a lot more of this, by the way, when you guys get to your painter class, because once you get in painter, it's extremely easy to build roughness maps because you literally are creating them right on the surface without having to do any rendering. It's all basically real time. So painter's pretty damn awesome. But there's a roughness map. And a few other things we could do as well. I could use the roughness to affect the bump. We could have little like scratches on the surface if we wanted to. But I think what I'm going to do is just try to add a little bit of waviness here. No, not to a normal. So a normal map is going to, actually that's kind of in a second. A normal map and a bump map are really similar, where that is going to, that sort of makes the surface look like it has like waves in it, like depth. A roughness map is actually oh my god, is the audio dead? Can you guys still hear me? It looks like I'm still getting my audio output. It says it's still working. Oh, okay, we're back. I blame it on this terrible internet connection at the office. I'm still in the office, by the way, by myself. Like, I have nobody here. It's relatively sad. I had Bree here earlier. Yeah, it's probably just the office connection. My output bandwidth looks absolutely abysmal at the moment. But a normal map is going to create surface variation. Yeah, normal maps are better because they're actually bending the normal tangent in different directions. It's definitely more realistic than bump, which is basically just a up and down fake. Roughness maps actually are similar to them because at the heart of all this is doing is simulating imperfections on the surface. That is still what a normal map is. I tend to think of normal maps as a larger scale or a lower frequency version of a roughness map. Roughness map, if you zoomed in really close, would actually look like a normal map, but from this distance, you can't see the individual waves. It's so tiny that it just kind of blurs everything. So basically what I'm getting at, Alex, is if you wanted to do this, don't do the normal map thing you did in week 2. All you would need to do is go online. You can either search for a roughness map like I did, which is the easy way, or if you did something like stain texture, like actually these are all awesome actually. You could look up something like this, or even something with like fingerprint. This one's even pretty good. Find another texture that has really good, like the type of detail you want, whether it's a fingerprint, like these would be good for water stains that have dried, like a residue that's built up. Bring it to Photoshop, desaturate it, so it can rip the color out of it. And what you want to do when you play around with the levels, like because you probably know how levels works, use levels and contrast to make it so the parts that are dry should be a lighter gray, and the parts that are clean, where you don't want it to be rougher, are the darker color. So in this case, I'd make sure that either through inverting it or just using levels or contrast or curves, this would be the whiter area. The area around it would be the darker part, and you would just save that as your black and white texture. Put it in your source images, and then just connect it to the glass roughness and see if it works. Like there are ways, like I did with that whole remap value, to sort of control it a little bit better, just to make sure it looks right. But even through a little trial and error, just with like doing this in Photoshop a couple times, you will eventually get it to look right inside of Maya. I'd say give it a shot, and you can always hit me up on Discord if you want to play around it, if you have any questions about it. Yeah, the other thing I want to do before we get out of here is we will add some variation to this thing with a bump map. We won't do normal for this one. I don't have a texture ready for that. So we're going to do the old classic bump trick. We're even going to use a Maya bump. So we're going to be doing a bunch of weird things here, combining Maya nodes with RenderMan. Some cross-pollination. We're going to go into 3D textures, and I'm going to use a 3D procedural. Yeah, and I'll send you guys the video recording, so you'll definitely be able to check that out and just kind of skip to this part of the video. But we're going to use a 3D texture real quick. I'm going to connect that and kind of talk about what these are. I used to use these a lot when I was doing like fakes for oceans, and I'm sure even David remembers the days of doing that, where we would build really cheap glass shaders and use these to simulate like animated waves on the surface. I used to do this a lot with a couple other instructors in these other lectures. But let's do solid fractal. And I'll show you what this looks like. There is a big reason why we're using a 3D texture, by the way. You'll notice it's a 2D texture, a 3D texture. You might be wondering, what is a 3D texture? Because texture files typically are just an image in two-dimensional space. How do you get a 3D texture? Like, what the hell is that about? Well, we will show you. Now, the trick here is if you are going to connect a 3D texture to the glass, our Hackett glass, it's going to go to the global bump. So global bump means it affects everything in here. And I'm pretty sure glass does have its own bump. Yeah, right there. But I typically just use the global all the time. So to connect this thing, you want to be very careful because when you guys did the normal map, remember how you had your own Pixar normal map node. So there's a very specific node that allows that to connect. This is sort of the same idea, where you just can't connect this in directly to a bump attribute or a tangent attribute because it needs to be converted to a different type of like format. So there's something in here under, we'll go to Maya Utilities, where there's a bump 2D and a bump 3D. So you can tell these probably mean something related to this whole 2D, 3D texture thing. It's bump, which is what we're doing. Because we're doing a 3D texture, we're doing bump 3D. And you can see the wonderful little 3D cube icon they've updated at some point over the last couple of years. Incredible job, Autodesk. We're going to connect this in. Really easy to figure out how these work. You can kind of tell, like, oh, that doesn't work. It's a single channel. It's alpha. And since this is now alpha, we're going to go here to color balance and just turn that little bad boy on immediately, just to say that, hey, the alpha channel is the color. Don't try to make some weird alpha channel in the texture. And this would go to bump normal. So just to show you where that's connected on the material, it's going right there. And I bet this thing is probably, brace yourself. If you guys want to see the bumpiest glass you've ever seen in your life, this is about to happen. It's about to get crazy. Oh my God. So it's not a normal map. This is a bump. And we are completely obliterating the details in this glass by bumping this all over the place. And a bump looks like this. It's a little different than a normal. So there actually is a good example right here. This is your normal map, which is showing how the polygon normals bend and the intensity they bend. This is a much more simple version of that. That's really just up and down. Like darker sections visually look like they're pushing down. The lighter areas look like they poke up. But they sort of do the same thing. This is just a crappier version of that guy. But we're doing the crappy version because it's easy at the moment. So we kind of made like really dirty looking ice from like a pond or something. So we've just absolutely obliterated these poor normals on this thing. But if I go to the bump 3D node, if we start fading this depth back, you will notice that it starts to ease back to something that's not as crazy. Let me do the crop real quick. Let's do 0.2. Yeah, there we go. You can already tell it's kind of not as nuts looking. So I want to show you what this looks like. A little trick here. If you go, if you click on the solid fractal, since it's already connected, if you hit the little S button, which is, I believe stands for solo, as in like Han Solo, you hit it, it should show me the texture if I have textures turned on. This is actually what the solid fractal looks like. And it's kind of interesting because if you click on the 3D texture, and check this out, if you, oops, I don't know why it thinks there's a crop turned on. That's a little bit weird. That's alarming. Okay, there we go. That was odd. Yeah, if you click on the 3D texture placement node and hit W, you'll notice the placement, like the position of the 3D texture, is actually in your scene. You can see it right now because I have that little S button turned on. But if I move this up and down, watch what that does right there. So I'm like sliding the texture through the surface, and if I go side to side, it's like physically sliding through this like three-dimensional texture effect. So you can almost think of the 3D texture as a cloud of color. It's everywhere, and your object is just sitting in the middle of this cloud. So depending on where it's in the 3D space determines what part of the texture it picks up. Whereas a 2D texture is just however it's UV determines where the texture picks up. These things are really cool though, because when you start getting into 3D textures, you can sometimes get around the issue of having to lay out UVs on something, and this sort of just works on its own. But cool thing about this little guy is the solid fractal does have a lot of controls for like doing animation right here, where you could move the time slider and animate it. This is how we used to do waves. But for this, what I could do is bring up the frequency ratio. And you can kind of watch what it's doing on the bottle. Actually, I might have gone the wrong way. Let's make that a little bit more exaggerated. And let's do, nope, not one. Oh, good Lord, that is definitely not the way I want to go. Yeah, one little small bumps in there. Let me bring actually the depth down just a little bit. That's probably part of it. Nope, not depth. It is this guy. So depending on like the contrast, the scale of it, and actually you could even scale this, by the way. If you click on the little placement, if I can get it again, it can be scaled, and it will scale the texture. So if I do this, it's much broader waves. If it's very tiny, you get much smaller waves. And let me just turn that S off again so you can see it in the render. Yeah, and it'll all update. So it's a pretty interesting effect though. So there we go. We got our bottle. We did some very weird things here today. I had all these big plans with like mesh lights, and I was going to do Pixar volume, do more with this stuff, but we kind of had a lot of fun with this one bottle. This thing, I don't know what this is anymore. It really does look like someone just took a disgusting pond, put it in an ice tray, and froze it overnight. So if that's what you're going for, you can definitely use this lecture for reference, and you can make your own disgusting pond ice cubes. They're great party favors. So, um, but yeah, I think we'll probably call this the meeting. We made our pond water. Um, Hopefully this is still helpful for you guys though. But yeah, just have fun for this week. You're really just wrapping up the activity, adding lights, adding candles and transmissive effects, getting glass working. So going into week 4, you're pretty much done with this thing, and then we're just in the home stretch. And probably next week I might do some Painter with you guys, just because I'm kind of itching to get back in that software and play around with it. So Substance Painter is going to be a lot of fun. But that's it. Appreciate everybody hanging out. High fives all around, and hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your night.